everyone. Welcome to my Friday update. I hope you're staying cool. It's been a hot one out there. Thanks for joining me today. Let me just share with you one thing that's coming up here in August before I get to answering a couple questions that people submitted. In August here, 8 Days of Hope is returning to Cedar Rapids, and they're going to do some derecho cleanup, working on some parks, and also grinding out some tree stumps. And we're looking for volunteers, so we'd sure love to have you sign up. You can go to our webpage, which will take you to another webpage, which probably takes you to another webpage, but you get the idea. You can sign up with 8 Days of Hope. They sure could use your help. That's the one announcement I have today. Let me dive into two questions that were submitted in the Since You Asked series. These are two questions that we weren't planning on getting to on a Sunday morning, and they're actually very different questions, but they're similar in their answer. And so the one question is this. It was submitted. Basically, it's this. What is wisdom? How do we know what wisdom is? What does the Bible say about wisdom? So that's one question. The other question is, why does Jesus tell his disciples at sometimes to talk about him and at other times not to talk about him? These two questions do relate, and I'm going to tell you how they relate here right now. First of all, wisdom is defined in Scripture as having understanding and then applying it to life. Okay, so you can have understanding, you can be smart, you can have a lot of learning, but until you put it into practice, you're not really actually wise. Wisdom in Scripture always implies action, that you're doing something wise. And to add to that, it's not only that you're doing something wise, but it's always wisdom in relationship. So let me explain that for a second. In the Old Testament, obviously you have the book of Proverbs that describes wisdom. There's a bunch of wisdom literature in the Old Testament. It's not just in Proverbs. There's also Ecclesiastes. If you're depressed, don't read Ecclesiastes because it'll totally kind of mess with you a little bit. And definitely don't read Lamentations. But there's a lot of wisdom there that basically goes to those deep existential questions about life. What's the meaning of life? Why are we here? How do we know what is wise and what is folly? And so Proverbs really starts off talking about this. It's interesting because Proverbs is attested to Solomon, but it's probably more than just Solomon. It's also wisdom over generations, because some of the wisdom sayings that we have in Proverbs are actually found in other ancient texts. So Proverbs, if you go to Proverbs 1 verse 7, it defines wisdom. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." And so really what it's saying is that there's learning, but wisdom is something that you do. A fool despises this, and in their actions they show this. Now, what's interesting is that Proverbs, in certain parts of it, is also about relationship. Because if you flip to Proverbs 3, a couple pages down, the writer, the author, is saying, "My son, listen to my words. Don't despise the Lord's discipline." That's 3 verse 11. Verse 12, "Because the Lord disciplines those he loves." Verse 13, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding." Verse 14, "For she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold." Yes, wisdom is described as a woman in the Old Testament. And so it's interesting because wisdom covers, in my opinion, all of our life, right? So it's not just learning, but it's putting learning into action. And it's not just putting learning into action alone, but it's also in relationships, because of all wisdom is found in relationship. And so somebody asked, what is wisdom? Read the book of Proverbs. You can read through Ecclesiastes. Even on some level, the Psalms has some wisdom literature, obviously, in it. So you can read that. Now, how does all this relate to Jesus in the New Testament saying, basically, don't tell, and then sometimes tell? Well, I want to take you to a story in Mark 4. This is kind of at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And Jesus tells the parable of the seeds. And if you remember the parable of the seeds, it's when a planter goes out and he tosses out seed. They didn't have, John Deere back then. It wasn't Iowa and all the rows of corn. You just kind of spread out your seed. And some of the seed would fall in good soil, and then some in weeds, and some in rocky soil, and some would fall in the path. And basically the path seed doesn't grow, the rocky seed grows up real quick, and then it gets scorched by the sun, and then the seed that goes into the weeds gets choked out by the weeds, and the seed that goes into good soil multiplies itself. Jesus says after this parable these very important words which relates to the question. Mark 4 verse 9, then Jesus said, whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Have you ever thought about that question? Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. Well, duh. If you've got ears, you're listening. Only people who can't hear or who don't have ears wouldn't listen. So what does he mean if you have ears to hear, that you let them hear? Well, in my opinion, Jesus is talking about wisdom. See, not everybody accepts wisdom. And you can instruct and you can teach. But if you're a fool, you say, I don't want anything to do with that. You see, when Jesus tells his disciples to sometimes go and tell people and sometimes not, Jesus understands that some people are going to either be ready for this wisdom, and so he tells the disciples, go and tell them, and then other people are not going to be ready for it. Sometimes it's based on Jesus' place in ministry. Maybe it's early on in his ministry or later on. But basically, Jesus is the incarnation of wisdom. Jesus is wisdom in flesh. And so Jesus understands the human heart better than anybody else. And so in a sense, Jesus, when he says, let those with ears hear, he's saying, look, I'm giving you wisdom right now. You need to open up your hearts to this, because a wise person listens to instruction. A wise person listens to discipline. A wise person follows God. And so these two questions actually relate a whole lot. Wisdom, we see it in the Old Testament in wisdom literature. Wisdom becomes flesh. Jesus takes on flesh. And I know it's weird. In the Old Testament, it's described as a woman. In the New Testament, Jesus is a man. It's a whole nother story. We could talk about that later. But basically, Jesus comes as the Son of God, and he is the Word made flesh. Word is another cryptic term for wisdom and everything that is knowledge since the beginning. And Jesus shares that with people who are willing to listen. The same thing that the author of Proverbs says to his son, son, listen to me. I have something good to tell you. Jesus understands that some people are going to reject it and some people are going to listen. And so that's why he says, if you've got ears to hear, you really need to hear what I'm saying to you. Apply it to your life. Let it sink in. And so, what is wisdom? Why does Jesus say what he says about sharing and not sharing? These two things come together. Because wisdom is about living out a life pleasing to God in relationship with others. I hope that's helpful on some level. Two questions that were submitted about wisdom and Jesus. God bless you this weekend. I hope you have a great weekend in the Lord as you connect faith and life, which, by the way, is wisdom. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.